welcome to the third of our 4 series on leadership within project management. Just want to welcome everyone to our webinar. We've been doing the series now, webinars in general, for just over a year. We're just looking at the catalog of all the ones that we have out there and realizing that we're actually approaching 20 of them. So yeah, great to have you all on board. And thank you for all your great feedback over the ones that we've done. It's been a real pleasure doing them for you, and I'm glad you're finding them a benefit. So we're going to get started. As I mentioned, this is the third of 4 in our series on leadership, and our pillar today is objective evaluation. So as always, we have Lauren helping us out on the technical side, so if you are having any difficulties, email her or text or just pop into the question box, and you can drop in a little note there and let us know if you're having any difficulties. We do record these as always, so if you do have difficulty with the sound or technology today, it'll always be available on the recording as well. We do tend to find the sound sometimes get a little bit out of sync at the beginning, so just give it a bit of patience there, and it should come around. You have your control panel off to the right, and that little red arrow, you can collapse it down if you need a little bit more real estate. We have the question box you can click on to pop up your question window, and then of course you can always raise your hand if there's an issue. As with all of our webinars, we like to try to make them as interactive as possible, so when you see this icon pop up, it's time for you to interact and answer a question or a poll or provide your feedback. And during the session, please feel free to type in a question in the question box at any time, and we'll check that box near the end, make sure that we get all of your questions answered. So with no further ado, I'm going to go to our opening thought. And the greatest obstacle to discovery is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge. And I was really looking for an appropriate quote for this 4th session around objective evaluation, and I thought this one was very apropos because we often think we know what we're talking about, and we have that opinion, we have that feeling, that belief, and it's really not that objective evaluation. So that objective evaluation can help us move past that illusion that we know what we're talking about. Okay. So as we do with our webinars, I'm going to turn the webcam off now. I'll come back to you near the end of our session, and this way you can focus on the slides and hopefully save some bandwidth as well. Just to put this into context, our 4 pillars: awareness, culture, objective evaluation, which is today's session, and then our 4th one coming up, and that's October the 2nd for focus. So we're going to take a look at objective evaluation today. So we're going to start off with our first question, and for this one, I'm actually not going to use the question feature in the webinar software. So I'm just going to leave this slide up, and if you can click on the questions box in your control panel, and I'd like you to answer this first question. We have 2 gentlemen running down a hallway. The name of this picture is actually called Terra Subterra, and I'd like you to just comment first of all on the facial expression of the first guy, the little guy at the front there. So just pop into your question box, and I'd like you to type in what you think, what you perceive, or what you see as his facial expression. Oh, lovely. We got a bunch of ones coming in. Scared, terrified, fear. He looks scared. Terror, fear, fear. Yep, okay. Now, panic, shock, fear, love it. Now I want you to think about the other gentleman, the one that's further down the tunnel there, that's chasing him. What facial expression do you see there? Hungry. That's an interesting one. Anger, also scared. Fear times 2. Aggressive. Okay, interesting. Oh, getting a couple saying fear again. A couple saying the same. Zombie. Love that one, Beth. Thanks. Bullying. Oh, interesting. Okay. So the next question for you is, what is their relative size? So relative size between the two, I'll call them gentlemen. 3 times. So Mark, I'm guessing you mean the guy behind is 3 times the guy in the front. 1.3. 3 times. Getting a few people saying maybe the same size. Interesting. The front one is much smaller. And I've got one saying, Ronald saying, same size, it's an optical illusion. Okay, Ron, you're on to me. Yes, this is actually an optical illusion. So they're actually the same size. And I was kind of looking for, what are some of the things I can use to quickly illustrate this? And we can see very quickly in our perception, for those of you who did say the same size, it's easy to, or sorry, it's a little bit more difficult because you've got to sort of think about it. But when we put it into that perspective, the front guy looks much smaller. People are saying 2, 3 times the size. The other one, coming up behind. Now, this is a simplified optical illusion, but really I was kind of wanting to illustrate a point here. Now, this next one I've taken from Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. Fabulous book, really, really like it. And in it, he did a study, and what he's showing here is a graph of patients rating their pain during a procedure. And the procedure was a colonoscopy, which if any of you have had that, it's a very uncomfortable procedure. Granted, it's gotten much better over the years, but he used this opportunity to get patients to rate their pain. Now, the graphs that you're seeing, so we see the pain intensity from 0 to 10. And patient A, as you see, peaked out at about an 8 for less than 10 minutes. So we had about a 9 minutes so there, but very, very high peaking. Now, patient B, although they did peak at 8 as well, most of it was actually much lower. So you see there was 4, there was 6, back to 6, but you notice it was over a much longer time, right? So we had it well over 20 minutes. So we're going to pop the next poll up for you, which the simple question is, which patient suffered more, A or B? So Lauren, if you can pop that poll question up for us. The poll is now open. Give you a few minutes to answer. 47% voted, 51% voted, 53% voted. Wait till we get to about 70, 80%. %, give it another few moments. Okay, let's pop those results up. Now, very expected, as expected, 76% of you saying patient B. It's interesting, I'm surprised that 24% said patient A. I'm guessing you're kind of looking at saying, well, yeah, they suffered less because it was a lower time. What's most interesting, though, is if you ask the patients after the fact, patient A's reported that they suffered much more than the patients B's did. And what this is kind of getting into is a cognitive situation around, we kind of have two brains. We have our present self and then our remembering self. And the remembering self in this scenario, patient A's rated themselves as having much more suffering than patient B's did. And the conclusion was that the way it ended. So if you notice in the patient A, we're back onto the slides? Yeah, okay, cool. The patient A, it peaked right at the end of their experience, and although patient B drew out much longer, so I tend to agree with the majority that says, well, patient B actually did suffer more because it was for as high as a pain, it was longer. I mean, if we just simply look at the area of the graph, it definitely is much greater area, but it's really how we remembered it, and basically what he determined out of this is because it trailed off and ended rather easily as opposed to immediately cutting off, we have that perception, that memory of having a better experience. And we can liken this to a vacation. So let's say you take a week's vacation. I just got back myself from a week in Algonquin Park. Had a great time, love it. So if at the end of that week, let's say I have 2 days of rain out of 7 on my vacation, Well, if those 2 days of rain happen at the end of the vacation, I'm going to have the memory or the perception that it was much worse than it was, as where if I had the 2 days of rain at the beginning or in the middle, and then I finished out the vacation with, you know, nice weather, I'm probably going to be remembering it as a better experience. And fortunately for me, that's actually what happened. The last couple of days there, the weather cleared up beautifully. We had beautiful full moon paddle on the last night before we packed up the next morning, and so yeah, it did, and consequently, I've got a very good memories of that trip. So we think about this in terms of projects, and you know, the objective evaluation. Our judgment of how things went, especially in the remembering side, can become kind of clouded based on, you know, how it went. So if we had a very painful project and it ended very painfully, it's going to be perceived as worse, as where if we had a painful project and, you know, kind of things sort of smoothened out and then we ended well, we're actually going to have a better memory of that. So what we want to do is really try to look past our perception around that and try to look at things, you know, a little bit more objectively. Now, on the objective evaluation side, as I was putting this entire series together, you know, we started out with this whole self-awareness piece, and you know, I looked at awareness and said, well, you know, we have to have awareness at ourselves, at our team level, at our organization, as well as our environment. And then I looked at the next pillar and thought, yeah, we need that there as well. And then I'm looking now at the objective evaluation. I'm thinking, you know, we really need it on all of those levels as well. Can I objectively evaluate myself, which is probably the most difficult. But then we also want to objectively evaluate our team, objectively evaluate our organization, as well as much as possible, objectively evaluate our larger environment. So it's really holding true through the entire series that we need to make sure that we have all 4 of those areas, you know, considered as we move forward. Okay, so let's get into the meat and potatoes here of objective evaluation. And really the first piece of this, as much as possible, is to kind of remove that human element. Okay, now when I say this, I don't mean, you know, we're automatons, we're robots. I mean, remove the human element around the evaluation side of things. As humans, we're very emotional beings. We're very complex, but we also tend to evaluate things more from an emotional level as opposed to an objective level. And really, that's the human element that we're talking about. Now, when you're dealing with people and you're working with people, yes, we want to keep the human element in there. We want to make sure that we're managing our team as humans, not as, you know, as robots. But we're talking about the, you know, evaluation piece of things. Now, the second element of that is consistent application. And again, I look back to the medical profession, and it's amazing when I read studies around, you know, diagnosis and how you can have 3 different doctors interpret 3 different, you know, or the same set of test results, like an X-ray, for example, and you can get 3 very different responses or different interpretations. So really, the more I can do that objective evaluation, the more I can get into a consistent application. And this is the statistical prediction rule. And we're going to look at a couple of examples of this. And in very fancy words, we're basically saying if we can build a formula around this, you know. Now, the temporary nature of projects, this often makes this very difficult to do. When we get into those environments, such as IT, such as you know, new product launches, working with a client yesterday, and their primary projects are new product launches. They basically, their business is to bring products in from around the world and then market them here in Canada. So their projects are really a PDLC, a product development lifecycle. And so hence they have the same cookie cutter formula that they use over and over again. So when we can get into using those same type of formulas, we've now got that consistency, we've got that learning, we've got that reapplication of kind of the same thing, so they can really apply this kind of stuff. The other piece around the formulas is usually simpler is better, okay? We like to overcomplicate things, right? So really simpler is better. and then to layer on top of that is focus on the results. Now, to give you a quick little example that kind of ties these 2 points together, I want to talk a little bit about an audit example. A very amazing person, Temple Grandin, and they actually made a movie about her. I don't know if anyone saw the movie. But she wrote a book many years ago, and she's done several books now. She's got her doctorate in animal handling, and she wrote a book called Animals in Translation. And basically, Dr. Grandin's story is that she is highly autistic, and she was able to overcome her autism, not only overcome it, but actually use it to her advantage. She realized fairly early on in her life that she had a unique perspective on the animal experience. And just to, she used that, and this is what her actual doctorate's in, is around animal handling. And so she is actually responsible for designing something like 80% of the animal handling facilities in North America. So these are the facilities that we take livestock to for processing. So one of the things that she talks about in her book is how to audit these facilities. And what she would see was these auditors come in with 200-300 checks, and these are all process checks. For example, how often is the floor being cleaned, and what soaps and what cleaners are you using to keep the floors clean, and so forth. And really, if I look at these multiple process checks, they're boiling down to one simple thing, which is, are the animals falling down? Now, you look at cows, you look at pigs, you look at the various livestock. Falling down is really, really super traumatic for them. So we want to make these facilities as humane as possible. Having them fall down is really, really bad. So what she developed was, in her audit process, was she had 7 simple fail criteria. It started out as 5. She added a couple more. But basically, you would come in and there were several simple criteria, and if you failed any one of those criteria, you failed the entire audit. And one of those items was, are animals falling down? It's really quite simple. Now, what happens is when we get into these types of scenarios, when we look at the results and say, and in her audit, it's 1% of animals. If more than 1% of animals are falling down as they're being handled in these facilities, then you fail. It's that simple. And we tend to justify it. It's like, oh, well, this and this and this, it doesn't matter. They're falling down, right? Now, when she would fail one of these facilities, she wouldn't tell them to, clean the floor better or change the materials that the floor is made of or anything like that. It was like, that's your problem. You need to figure that out. You need to do a root cause analysis and figure out why it's happening. But from an objective evaluation perspective, the reality is they're falling down. And what she was finding was these 200 process checklist audits, you would pass because you might have 1 or 2 of those items fail, or you might even have all of them pass, and meanwhile the animals are still falling down. So it really kind of brought it into a very clear picture in my mind around, when we look at objective evaluation, we should really focus on the result, and we should keep it as simple as possible, right? So if we can take that into our project world and say, basically, are we delivering what we say we're going to deliver? And we can start to get into all kinds of root cause analysis, but the reality is if we're not delivering, we're failing. So let's figure that out, right? So I'm going to move on to the next part of this, and we're going to pose a question to you, and this is known as the Linda problem. Okay, and I'm going to pose the question. We'll get you to do your answers, and then I'll give you the background on the Linda problem after. Okay, so I'm going to read a statement, and I'm going to ask you for an A or B answer on this. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a quick little bit of background here first. So Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned of issues of discrimination, social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Which is more probable? A, Linda is a bank teller, or B, Linda is a bank teller and active in the feminist movement. Okay, so Lauren, if you can bring up the poll. And while you're answering the poll, I'll walk through the scenario again. Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination, social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Which is more probable? A, Linda is a bank teller, or B, Linda is a bank teller and active in the feminist movement? Okay, we're at 32%, 43%. So we'll wait till we get to about 70% voted. $64%. $68%. We'll give it another few moments. $72. Let's get up to 75 and then we'll close it. Whoa, 74. Oh, cliffhanger. All right, let's close this. Okay, you guys are awesome. I have now had the first time more A's than B's. Wow, this is interesting. So this was a study done by Kahneman and Tversky. Daniel Kahneman's a Nobel laureate psychologist, and his I always forget Tversky's first name. Anyways, so they came out with this in, and I think it was in the, if I remember correctly, it was like in the early 80s. And it's the conjunction fallacy. Now, 80% of people who answered this answered B. And usually only about 20% answered A. And I've done this with a number of classes, and this is the first group who has ever answered more A's than B's, 62% A and 38% B. Wow, that's amazing. The correct answer is A, because you can't be both and be more than just one, right? So the subset can never be more probable than the superset. So I feel like I'm preaching to the choir a little bit right now. It sounds like you guys, got this objective evaluation thing. This is really impressive. I'm glad I'm sitting down. Most people, like I say, about 80% of people usually answer B based on the description, and then when we talk about it, say, well, the subset can't be more probable than the superset. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, I see that now, right? I answered B when I did this. So that's interesting. That's very interesting. Okay. So one of the things we want to be careful of is not being distracted by irrelevant details. So the details I gave you in the description really don't have anything to do with the probable or not. So, and if you want to research this a little bit more, just, Google conjunction fallacy, or you can just Google the Linda problem, and it actually pops up on its own. So yeah, that's interesting. Wow. All right. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about wine and wine experts. Now, there's actually I'm getting the thumbs up from Lauren on this one. There's actually a multi-billion-dollar industry in wine futures. So what you can do is you can actually go buy, a bottle of Bordeaux when it's first bottled, and then you keep it for a few years, and as it matures, it will gain value, right? So you're basically kind of, betting on the future. And of course, there's people who go to university, they study wine, they, sommeliers, they become experts, right? So what's interesting, though, is wine experts have about a 60% correlation in their predictions of wine futures. So if you actually hired a wine expert and said, okay, I'm going to invest $1,000, I'm going to go buy a bunch of wine and sit on it and hope to make some money, and if you engage an expert, you got about a 60% chance of getting a good return on your money. Now, there's a gentleman named, and I'm really bad at this one, it's Ashin Finflirter. He's actually an economist and a statistician, and he thought, I wonder if I could predict wine futures if I wrote a formula on this. So what he did is he talked to the experts, and he found that a wet spring, a hot summer, and a wet fall are the key factors for a good harvest. Okay, so if we have a wet spring, excuse me, nice high temperatures during the summer, and then at harvest time we have some rain and it's kind of a wet fall, that's what are the conditions that create the best wine. So being a statistician, he plugged it into a formula. So the delta of price, hence the change of price, is take 12.15 negative and times beta 1, and I forget what beta 1, beta 2, beta 3 was, so we got winter rainfall, that creates our wet spring, average summer temperature, there's our hot summer, harvest rainfall, and then we layer in the age of the vintage, because of course wine gets better with age. So you put these factors together and there's your delta in price. Now, what's really interesting about this, first of all, two things. It's a very simple formula. I know it kind of looks a little daunting because we've got, beta 1, beta 2, and, things like this. But really, there's three main elements here: wet spring, hot summer, wet fall. Okay. So we boiled it down to what are the true factors that actually cause the difference? What are the factors that are really having an effect? Now, when we build more complex formulas, let's say we had 20 factors in here. Well, if we think of those three factors having 100% of effect, they're about 33% each. If I had 20 factors in, I'm now down to each factor having about 5% each. And what often happens is we get the wrong factors in, and now the factor affects the formula but doesn't actually affect the realistic outcome. So, if you're going to do something like this, what we need to do is kind of come up with the formula and then test it and see does it actually mirror what's happening kind of in the real world. So yeah, and you can Google this; it's online. So now, if you want to get into wine futures, you can apply this formula and apparently you get about an 80% chance of being correct. So in his study, he was able to create an 80% correlation. Now, let's go back to all of us being human. He took this back to the wine industry and of course said, hey, I've got this great formula that's going to predict 80% chance, and of course they all threw it out because it's a formula and they're experts. So yeah, sometimes. Anyways. So let's now take a look at some examples, right? So we've kind of got the theory in place. Let's take a look at some examples. And when I started to put this together, I thought, we've got actually a pretty good library of webinars so far, and I'm thinking I can actually think of a few things that we used objective evaluation within our webinars over the years. So let's take a look at some examples. I'm going to pull 4 examples, one from risk, earned value management, critical path, and then the closed webinar. So our next poll is what's the biggest killer? You're going to be presented with 4 options, and I'd like you to choose which one you think is the one that's going to cause the most deaths. And it's a very morbid webinar we've got going today, isn't it? That's why we needed some wine. Okay, we got 38% voted. All right, where are we at? 75% voted. All right, let's bring up again, a very savvy group. Wow, this is awesome. So 61% voted ladders. You guys are right. We got 16% on mowing the lawn, which is actually the next worst one. And then sharks only came in at 5%, and then vending machines at 18%. So let's take a look at the results here. So, and this is from the U.S. Vending machines killed 11 people. Sharks only 1. This is on a yearly average. Mowing the lawn was about 75, and then ladders was 113. So, I kind of, when I put this one together, it's like if you ask people what they're scared of, lots of people who go up ladders, but are scared of sharks. And meanwhile, it's we want to be objective as to kind of where we're putting our real concerns around it. And when we layer this into the risk discussion, it becomes a case of as much as we may be afraid of sharks, let's put our resources into doing something about those ladders, right? So we want to make sure that we're applying our resources well and effectively, in areas that are actually going to make a difference. And that's really what we're talking about when we talk about the objective, evaluation. Okay, so our next one, and this one comes out of the earned value management. What we see sometimes is not, what appears is not always what's actually there. So we got this very cool picture of a chameleon crawling along a branch, and when we take a closer look, it's actually two ladies who have been painted to look like a chameleon. So it's a very cool picture. And again, having that clear picture as to what's going on and having that clear picture. So our next question now is what is the status of this project? So we've got build 10 widgets, 10 weeks, cost of $10,000. Our status right now is we're at week 3. We built 2 widgets, 2,500, and the question is how are we doing? Let's bring that poll up. Okay, we're at 4% voted, 6%. And I'll read through the scenario again just in case you didn't quite catch it before it disappeared. Our project is to build 10 widgets, 10 weeks, $10,000. We're at week 3, 2 widgets are built, and $2,500 is our actual. Okay, we're at 50% voted. Let's give it another few seconds. All right, let's bring up the results. And 55% of you identified, yes, we're behind schedule, we're over budget. So we're at week 3. It's 10 widgets, 10 weeks, so it's a very linear one widget per week. So we get into the, we're only at 2 widgets, so we're behind schedule. And if we're doing $10,000 for 10 widgets, $1,000 a widget. If we've only built 2, we're at $2,500. So we are actually behind schedule, over budget. The next biggest one was behind schedule, under budget, at 23%. And that's not an uncommon response I get on this scenario because, well, we see that we're behind schedule because we've only got 2 widgets, but we're at week 3, it's $1,000 a week, so we're at $2,500, so we're kind of underspend, which we are. However, we need to consider how much it's costing us per widget, and that's really the beauty of the earned value. It gives us that objective measure of how we're doing. Now, there's of course lots of detailing nuances, stuff that starts to kick in, like oh, it's taking us longer to do the first couple of widgets because of learning curve and things like that. And yes, we would want to take those into account, but if we're taking those into account, they should be taken into account in the project plan, right? So that we recognize that the first few are going to be slower and the later ones are going to be happening faster. So we should have that put in. But we also want to be careful that when things are starting to slip like this scenario, that we don't, kind of justify it and kind of move away from the objective evaluation and move into the, more subjective. So basically kind of being truthful with ourselves. So what can we do with these numbers? We've got the project at 10 weeks, 10 widgets, 10 weeks, $10,000. Our status week 3, 3 widgets, or 2 widgets, 2,500. So we plug those into the formulas. Ooh, there's those formulas again. And now when I go have those conversations with my sponsor, with my client, I can, use those numbers to objectively project out where we're going to finish based on our current performance. And then I can have that intelligent conversation with my team, with my sponsor, to say, here's where we're going to finish. Is that okay? If it's not, what are we going to do? Which one are we going to fix? Are we going to fix both? What reaction are we going to do here? And then, of course, we can make our adjustments and get approvals and do all those wonderful things that we like to do as PMs. Continuing on the theme of the objective evaluation, taking a look from our webinar from critical path method. So here we're looking at a project plan, and we have a project plan here with 3 basic paths showing up. Okay, so let me just, so we got path 1 here. Whoops, what's going on? There we go. So we got path 1 here, and then we've got path 2 and 3. So we've expanded out path 1. Path 2 and 3 are just collapsed. So we can see what we've got here now. When we look at 3 paths, we get into the concept of merge bias. And this is where Monte Carlo scenario will help us pull things together or get a more objective evaluation. So our current project plan is saying 6 months to get things done. We're looking at 3 paths. We calculated this with critical path method. When we run it through the Monte Carlo, the 6-month date, we're getting a less than 5% chance of completion. If we want 80% chance of completion, we really should be looking at 8 months. And this concept we went into greater detail with on our critical path discussion. And I used the example of, if you have 3 cars to start, you have about an 80% chance of each one individually starting. When we combine those 3 together, because we need to do all 3 as part of our project, being, each one of these is a task and I need to get it done, I've got about an 80% chance of it being done on time. Well, I've actually only got about a 51% chance of getting all 3 of them done on time, assuming that my numbers are showing kind of accurate. And so, we start to look at factors like merge bias, like, optimism bias, and start to realize that, we're kind of setting ourselves up a little bit at the beginning. The good news is, of course, the data's there, right? And if we can kind of step back and be objective. And I think the other part too that a lot of people struggle with, and I know I do, is that sometimes you just don't want to be the bearer of bad news, or you get into a culture where it's the shoot the messenger. So do you want to be the one going to your boss and saying, hey, I got 51% chance of getting this thing done, or even worse on our previous scenario, less than 5% chance? Yeah, those can be tough conversations. So then you can decide how you want to take that forward. This is a bit of an adaptation, sort of more of a summary one from the project close and the lessons learned piece. First, we need to be as objective as possible. And I came across a really great quote a while back. Basically, we tend to judge ourselves by our intentions and we judge others by their actions. So in doing so, we sometimes justify that, hey, things went off the track here, didn't intend it to, so we say that's okay. But the reality is other people are looking at us based on our results. And it's one of the things that I really like about the Temple Grandin audit example is, it's really being very clear and very, this isn't a personal attack. This is just here's the results, here's what they look like. And I got the opportunity to actually see Dr. Grandin. She was giving a talk one time when she first released her book, and it was one of those, I forget what little town we were in Southern Ontario, but there was like a dozen people in the room, and I mean, like, she's now an internationally sought after author, speaker. But I'll tell you something, if you ever want to hear someone tell you the truth, go talk to Dr. Grandin, because man, she does not sugarcoat it. It's the way it is, and I mean, she self-admits this. It's part of her autism. It's like, there's no sugarcoating. It's just, this is the way it is, and it's very objective. It's very straightforward. It's very, the facts. So when we look in the mirror, we want to really try to be as objective as possible. Look at the numbers. What did our schedule do? What did our budget do? What did our scope do? Use 360-degree evaluations. They're fabulous things when, of course, they're designed right and applied right. But get those hard lessons from people. And I finished this piece off by just simply saying, don't justify, learn. You know what? Yeah, you're right. I didn't do a good job here. I'm not going to justify it that it was because of this and this and this. but I'm going to learn from it, you know? So now I'm going to look at the causes and say, well, it happened because of this and this and this, and what can I do in the future to help prevent that from occurring again, or to, you know, have a different reaction, right? My coach said to me, I was chatting with him about a thing, and he said, I want you to ask yourself two simple questions. The first is, what just happened, right? And, you know, as objectively as possible, you know, what just happened. And the second, and this was the real key one, he says, what did you make it mean, right? So it's the, you know, let's try to take that step back, take the emotion out of it, take the, you know, the ego out of it, and just simply ask ourselves, you know, what just happened? What did I make it mean? You know, let's not justify the results, and let's say let's objectively learn from the experience, right? And 360 evals can really help us do that, because we can get that other person's perspective. Okay, so this brings us towards the end of this piece. As part of the 4 pillars, we started out with awareness. We need to be aware of our surroundings, of our environment, of, you know, what's going on. We need to build that culture. We need to create that culture so that people are willing to come forward and talk and not hide data, and that it's a generative culture, a building culture, as opposed to a destructive or hiding culture. Adding in the last piece of the objective evaluation, so as much as possible, we need to look at things from that objective perspective, such that we see what the real data is, what the numbers are, and what they are telling us, and you know, try to remove the, you know, emotional ego reaction piece of it as much as possible, and say, you know, how did we actually do, right? And, you know, is it there? Is it good? You know, and learn from those experiences. Next section, we're going to focus on focus. So, you know, kind of taking that and want to look at some concepts around not being distracted, you know, and what should we be focusing on, and the two, objective evaluation and focus, really dovetail on these pieces, because it kind of helps us get, you know, our head in the game and into the right place. So we'll look forward to seeing you in October for that. So it's going to revisit our opening thought. The greatest obstacle to discovery is not ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge. You know, this whole concept of we think we know it all, I've seen myself do this, I've seen people I work with do this, where they dismiss the answer because they already know the answer. And, you know, in fact, you know, there are some times when you don't know the answer. I know for me, there's lots of times I don't know the answer. But it's, you know, if we have that illusion of knowledge, we don't go and seek it out. So I really do encourage you to, you know, put aside your beliefs for a moment and say, is that the full story? Is there more here? You know, there's a good friend of mine whose mom is now facing going into a retirement home, and it's a little bit of a sudden onset. And he made the comment to me that there's this huge long waiting list in Toronto for getting people into, you know, into facilities. And I said to him, I said, well, you know, I heard that story as well, but, you know, and like when I say huge long, I mean, people are talking like, you know, it's a 20-year, 10 and 20-year wait. My mom was on the wait list for less than a year. You know, she got into a great facility. So, you know, I said to him, I said, well, it doesn't hurt to try, and, you know, it's all situational, so give it a try. So he had the belief that, you know, this is it. He wouldn't even consider that, and now he's like, he said to me afterwards, he said, thank you for kind of, you know, opening my eyes and making me realize that, and so he's got her on the list. So hopefully works out. Anyways, so just gonna leave you with this last parting thought here. What you see is all there is, and this is from Daniel Kahneman's work. You know, maybe square wheels, well, they're everywhere, and as we can see, these gentlemen pushing along a cart with square wheels that's full of round wheels. So, you know, where you look, which will kind of be a little bit, this is a bit of a lead into our focus piece, where you look, but also, you know, stepping back and assuming you don't know everything, give yourself permission and say, I don't have all the answers. Even though we may be very knowledgeable, it's good to get those secondary opinions, get those extra perspectives, and, you know, really look at things from that other perspective.